Today we are going to do our next lesson, and our next lesson is about the lady that you see in the picture. The lesson is going to be about Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement. So today's lesson is going to have some objectives like we always do. The first objective is students will describe the life and contribution of Rosa Parks. We are going to be able to identify the main causes for which Rosa Parks fought during her lifetime. We're going to be able to explain the terms discrimination and segregation and explain the concepts of civil rights, explain the importance of the success of the Montgomery bus boycott. We have a few vocabulary terms that we're going to hear today, so be on the lookout for these. The first one is assign, to give or allocate, to set apart something. Boycott, an action in which a group of people join together to refuse to do business with a company or organization as a way of expressing strong disapproval. We have disrupted, preventing or prevented something from happening by using methods that could cause confusion and turmoil. Injustice, a lack of fairness. And then segregation, the practice of keeping groups of people separate or apart due to reasons such as race. So that is kind of an overview of what we are going to be doing. We have already learned quite a bit in this unit called Fighting for a Cause. We have learned about Susan B. Anthony, President Lincoln, Eleanor Roosevelt, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Jackie Robinson. These people have experienced unequal treatment, whether it is talking about unequal treatment in baseball, like Jackie Robinson. We've also had women who have fought for the right to vote, women who fought for the right for education, and different things like civil rights, human rights, all those good things. Today we are going to kind of talk about how even though civil rights are guaranteed by law, many people have been excluded from exercising their civil rights throughout the history of our country. Civil rights movement was a period of time in our country's history from the 1950s to the 1960s when people from many races and different groups in society helped African Americans fight for their civil rights, which later led to the increased rights for people and many other groups. So just because, slavery was not allowed, they still had people treating African American people not fairly. So we are going to be talking about Rosa Parks and hearing her story. And one event that occurred, and it was an evening while Rosa Parks was riding a bus, and that whole thing kind of sparked the civil rights movement, and that's the story that we're going to hear today. So I want you to listen carefully to find out the important role that the bus played in Rosa Parks' decision to help fight for a cause. And what would that cause be? So here is a picture of Rosa Parks. Her name was Rosa Louise Parks, and she was born a long time ago in 1913 in Tuscany, Alabama. Her family name was McClally. Rosa and her family were African American. Rosa grew up on a small farm with her mother, brother, and grandparents. Rosa was a happy child. She loved her family. However, Rosa lived at a time and in a place where African Americans faced discrimination. This was especially true in the South, where Rosa lived, because in that part of the United States, there was segregation, which is the practice of keeping groups of people separate. Because of segregation, African Americans and white people did not go to the same schools, eat at the same restaurants, or go to the same movie theaters. When traveling by bus, African Americans were expected to sit in certain seats. It was as if African American and white people lived in different worlds. When Rosa was a little girl, she attended a school that was just for African American children. It was an old one-room schoolhouse that only held classes for 5 months of each year. Far too often, there weren't enough desks or school supplies for the students. Rosa noticed that buses took white children to new school near where she lived. When Rosa was 11 years old, she was sent to Montgomery, Alabama to continue her studies. But when she was 16, Rosa had to leave school to care for her grandmother and her mother, who had both become ill. To help support the family, Rosa worked in a shirt factory. So I want you to second look at the differences between the two schools. This was one where it would be very close to what Rosa Parks went to school at. And then this was one that was close to what she was talking about when she said there was one close by that was only for the white children. And look how different it looks. Look how brand new things, for that time. Right now it doesn't look brand new to us, but for that time, look how brand new all the things that are in this school are. And how every children is able to have something on their desk, so it looks like I don't know if they're investigating shapes or something, doing some type of a math, because look on the board, that looks like they have little graphs. Whereas over here, not every child has something on their desk. Not every child has a desk. So that's something that was different. When Rosa was 19, she married Raymond Parks. Raymond was a barber. You heard about a barber shop when you heard about Susan B. Anthony. So look, think about what does a barber do? Barber cuts hair, okay? So he was also actively involved in Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. This, the word chapter here, it means a certain, a group in a certain area that makes up one small section of a larger group. So, they had a bunch of different chapters of the NAACP, and the chapters all formed together to make one big group. But they would have little mini groups, kind of like if we think about our school. We have a bunch of classrooms. Those would be kind of like the chapters. And if we all form together, we would all be Ridgeline. But as a classroom, we are still a part of Ridgeline. We're just a smaller group. So that's kind of the same thing with the different chapters in the NAACP. They would have many groups, kind of like our classroom, and all of them together would be part of the same organization, just like all of our classrooms are part of the same school. This organization wanted to make life in the United States fairer and safer for all African Americans and end segregation in the South. Rosa also became involved and served as the Montgomery chapter secretary. In addition, she returned to high school to earn her high school diploma. When came the day in Rosa's life when she stood up for what was right. Actually, Rosa did not stand up, and that was the reason why we remember and honor Rosa Parks to this day. In the evening of December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, it was cold. The streets were full of people shopping or making their way home from work. By this time, Rosa had a job as a seamstress at a local department store. Her day had just ended, and she had rushed to catch the city bus that would take her home. As Rosa boarded the bus, she could see that it was already quite full. Because the section at the back of the bus where African Americans usually sat was full, Rosa found a seat near the middle of the bus. The seat Rosa found was just behind the seats reserved for the white people. Before long, all the seats on the bus were full and several white people were left standing. Back then, the bus driver had the authority or the power to move people, and African Americans were the first to be moved. The bus driver noticed the people standing and ordered several African American people on the bus to give up their seats. All of them did as he asked, except for Rosa. When the bus driver told Rosa that if she did not get up, he would call the police to come and arrest her. She quietly responded, "You may do that." When he asked her one more time to stand up, Rosa responded by saying, "I don't think I should have to stand up." Why do you think she refused to stand up? Well, she had just finished a long day's work and she was probably tired, right? And she was probably tired of having to live with the fact that she didn't have the same rights that everybody did. So I'm guessing that is why she didn't stand up and why she didn't feel like she should. So the bus driver made a call, and before long, a police officer arrived. The officer wanted to know why she would not give up her seat. Rosa responded by asking the officer a question. "Why are you always pushing us around?" she asked. Rosa was arrested and taken to the police headquarters. Later that night, she was released on bail. And bail is the money someone pays when he or she has been arrested so that he or she can stay out of jail until the trial or hearing. The law at this time in Alabama gave bus drivers the right to assign seats. And it also gave them the right to carry guns. And the word assign means to give or to place. So just like Miss Beam assigns seats for every student in my classroom, that's kind of what the bus driver could do. As a result, many African American people felt threatened and were frightened to challenge this practice. But Rosa had done so. Rosa later said that she had not planned to protest, but in that moment, her desire for civil rights and her sense of injustice drove her to make that decision. Injustice means the lack of fairness. "When I made that decision," Rosa said, "I knew that I had the strength of my ancestors with me. This was the moment that changed history. Rosa had refused to move, and now others would show their support for her." So it was decided that hundreds of African Americans who rode the city buses to work would walk instead. This kind of action is called a boycott. A boycott is when a group of people join together to refuse to do business with a company or organization. So in Montgomery, the people refused to ride the city buses. The NAACP began to organize what was known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. African American women's groups also began to organize it too. A young man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the boycott. Dr. King, and you can see, if you remember Mr. Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., he's right here. So he said, "We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Beginning on December 5th, 1955, people refused to ride the city buses in Montgomery. The boycott lasted for 382 days. So think about this. 1 year is 365 days. So if the boycott lasted 382 days, was it shorter or longer than a year? It was longer than a year. So without passengers to ride the buses couldn't afford to run. At the time in Montgomery, more than 7 out of every 10 riders on buses were African American. So out of 10 people, 7 of them were African American. That means that there were 3 people. So let's say there were 30 people on a bus. Okay. Out of every 10, that means 3 of them were white people, right? So if we have 3 groups of 10, take 3 out of each of those groups. You have 9 people who were white. The rest of them, which 30 minus 9 would be what? 21. 21 of those people on that bus would be African American. So if you take and you think about that, the boycott meant that the buses would only have so many people on it. If there was only 30 people, normally it would be 9 people. So that doesn't give them much money. Businesses were disrupted. So when something is disrupted, it means that certain things are prevented from happening due to possible turmoil or confusion. And many white people supported the boycott too. On November 13th, 1956, the United States Supreme Court decided that Montgomery's segregated bus seating was unconstitutional. That meant that it was against the law. A court order was served on December 20th, 1956, and the boycott ended the next day. After that, buses were integrated and African American people could sit wherever they wanted. That boycott became a powerful way for people to protest peacefully. So when people protest peacefully, they're not using violence. So here is a map that has highlighted 2 states. The blue highlighted state is Michigan, and the green highlighted state is Alabama. Rosa Parks' actions helped to start the civil rights movement. In fact, Rosa became known as the mother of civil rights movement. Rosa remained an active member of the NAACP and other civil rights groups. She showed her support for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by participating in civil rights marches. Rosa became a member of the staff of Michigan congressmen. So the state of Michigan is highlighted in blue, like I said. And then the green is Alabama, where she was from and where she rode the bus. She worked in his office for 23 years from 1965 until she retired in 1988. Rosa also founded an institution to help young people complete their education. In her lifetime, Rosa received several awards for her courage and her work. In 1979, the NAACP awarded Rosa its Spring Iron Medal. Rosa also received 2 of the United States government's most important civilian awards, or the honors given to people who aren't serving in our military. Rosa received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1996 and the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in 1999. Rosa once said, "I see the bus pass every day, but to me, that was the way of life. We had no choice but to accept what was the custom. The bus was among the first ways I realized that was a black world and a white world. Incredibly, by her own actions, Rosa Parks changed that world. Rosa became a symbol of power of nonviolence. Her quiet, courageous act changed America and changed the course of history." So, what were some of the examples of discrimination that Rosa Parks faced? So there were a couple. First of all, segregated schools were open for fewer months of the year than the white schools. And segregation in public places such as schools and the places of employment. Segregation on buses. Remember that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, and she knew that the segregation laws were unfair, and she chose to fight and stand up for what she believed was fair and just. The civil rights movement was a series of events that involved people fighting for equal rights for all people. And Rosa's actions are connected to the civil rights movement in that she protested against discrimination on a city bus and demanded equal rights. And do you guys remember who organized the boycott of the buses? Martin Luther King Jr. organized the boycott. And was the Montgomery boycott successful? Yes. And was it more than a year? Yep. and the segregation on buses was outlawed. So that's how we know that it was successful. How did Rosa Parks continue helping others after the Montgomery bus boycott? Well, she supported Martin Luther King Jr. She worked in a congressman's office, and she founded an institution to help young people complete their education. And how is the United States today different than that of the United States of Rosa Parks' early life? Well, now we don't have segregation on buses or in schools, and there is less discrimination. So, I am going to kind of show you now what you guys are going to do. Whoops, wrong thing, sorry. When you guys go onto our Google Classroom, you guys are going to see the worksheet, and it's going to be in a Google form. So you are going to type your answer for your name and your last name, so I know who you are. What was Rosa Parks' main cause? These causes are the same for all of the people that we've been learning about. So you're just going to figure out which one is the correct one for her. What were three important events in her life? You need to make sure that you restate the question in your answer. You need a capital and a punctuation. And finally, you need to make sure you have 3 events in your answer. So that's 4 points. To get the 4 points, you have to make sure you have all of those things. Okay? And describe a boycott. So you're going to say a boycott is blah, 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 blah. Okay? And then here, how do you think Rosa Parks would like to be remembered? Okay, so think about this. Think about different adjectives that you could describe her. And how do you think she would want to be described? Make sure that you restate the question in your answer. Make sure you have a capital and a punctuation mark. Make sure you give some thought to it, right? So that would give you 3 points. You can say, Rosa Parks would like to be remembered by blah, 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 blah. Okay? Or you could say, I think Rosa Parks would like to be remembered by blah, 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 blah. All right, boys and girls, that's all that I have for you today. I hope you have an amazing day. And I will have another lesson for you tomorrow. Bye.